I'm going to show you guys how I built the steampunk factory from start to finish. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the process, not so that you can copy this factory, but so you can design your own. Once you have a process and stop guessing, building gets a lot easier. Before color, before texture, before detail, this entire factory was just shapes. This stage decides whether the build works or not. Layout answers one question: how does this building exist in space? If the layout is unclear, no amount of detail will fix it. When dealing with shapes in Minecraft, we're mostly limited to rectangles and circles. You can see that this build is just one big rectangle with two smaller rectangles inside of it and a circle in one of those rectangles. One important thing with the scale that you'll notice for this build is that I made the part of the building that's further back taller. If you make parts of your build in the front taller, then they will block out parts of your other build. I am including multiple towers and chimneys in my layout, specifically because it's a steampunk build, and that's going to allow me to have smoke coming out of there, give off the illusion of heat and power going through this build. I also like to make my roofs during the layout stage. You can see that I've included a variety of roofs. This one is a simple gable, and this one is a taller A-frame. Again, I went with the taller roof in the further back building so that it could act as a background. At this stage, roofs aren't details, they're just caps on our shapes. Their job is to finish the form, not to be interesting. If your roof only looks good after it's been detailed, then the shape underneath probably isn't strong enough. This is also a good time to plan out your door locations, because this can really help you understand scale and make sure it's the size you want it to be. You can also check your walkways and your ceiling height. Steampunk builds can be large, but they still need to be usable. Once the shape and scale are working, then we can start to think about color. Color shouldn't be used to fix weak forms. It should support a form that already works. When I think of steampunk, obviously the first block I think of is copper. For the roof, you can see that I started off in a more oxidized copper and then created a gradient. I chose the deep slate tiles for a trim around the roof. And for the walls, I started off with the regular copper block and I created a gradient to a lighter reddish color. I think one of the reasons that this block palette is going to work well together is because it dips into complementary colors a little bit, with this gradient pushing into sort of a reddish color and this gradient pushing into a greenish color. We will also be using spruce wood for a little bit of the build and the detailing. You'll notice that I don't have a lot of highly saturated colors. Maybe this concrete powder is the most saturated thing. And I'm only going to use this very rarely for shadows on the roof. But by keeping the color palette desaturated as a whole, it helps us dip into that more realistic vibe. For this stage, I want you to just get the base materials in. I kind of feel like this is too much copper. So I'm going to change this part of the building and the tower to this block palette, which doesn't use any copper, but it kind of holds the same color scheme. So let me do that real quick. Once we have our base colors in place, we can go ahead and start punching out some windows. Now that we have all our walls filled, our colors picked out, and the general shape we like, we can go ahead and start texturing this build. I'm going to start with the roofs. I'm going to put our trim in. I'm going to try to create some shadows by using our gradient. So let's get right into it. Roofs are large, simple surfaces, so I like to start the texturing here. If it works here, you're off to a really good start. This might be pushing it into over texturing a little bit, but the main things I try to think of when I'm texturing a roof is, where can I show that the roof has worn down a little bit over the years? Where has it been exposed to the elements? So maybe more water pools up in this area and drains down here. And how can I show the time of this build, just the age of it? Your texture should feel uneven but intentional. If you are worried about over texturing, take a step back, and if it reads from a distance as one surface, that's your goal. If the texture jumps out from far away, then it's probably doing too much. On the top part of the roof here, I tried to show a more of a shadow effect, just because it being this high up, I figured it'd be getting hit by the light. So I have the darker elements on this side and the lighter elements on this side. Now let's get into texturing the walls and see how it turns out. I applied a simple gradient texture to the walls. I feel like the birch wood is fighting me a little bit here, but I know that if I take it out, all the birchwood haters are going to feel validated. So we're going to try to make it work. I may just have to use some extra details to cover it up a little later. There are a few ways you can texture your build. You can do a gradient like I have, where I'm just moving from light to dark blocks. Or you can texture with intention. And this is when maybe I'll have some dripping spots under the windows. Try to show some weathered areas, just like we did for the roof. I'll texture around windows, under overhangs, near supports. Maybe bring up a little mossy cobblestone where there might have been moss grown. But if you do it that way, you just want to be intentional and think, where can I show age? How would this have weathered? And just avoiding patterns, because real wear isn't random and it's more cluster based. So if you're not just using a gradient and you see a pattern, it's probably too much. Obviously, you'll want to use what I call the distance test, and that's from a distance. Do the walls kind of read as calm? Nothing's too saturated. If texture jumps out here and is the main focus of the build, then it's probably competing with the structure and it's probably too much. But I feel like with our build, you can still see the structure mostly, and that's what's jumping out to me at first. And now that all our texturing is done, we can go ahead and get into the detailing stage. And that is the details all finished. This is the part that most people will rush into, and by not doing the other parts first, it can really hurt your build. One thing I like to do is to make sure every detail has a purpose, and I try to be able to explain what that detail's purpose is. If it doesn't have a purpose, it's probably just decoration, and decoration can kill a lot of builds. This is probably the rule I struggle with following the most, as sometimes I just put something in because I think it looks cool, but I always try to make sure it has a purpose. I'm not going to go over every detail, but obviously steampunk is just a lot of machines, pipes, smoke, steam. There are so many details you can add to a steampunk build, and you almost want to make it feel like a system. Power, pressure, exhaust. The pipes aren't just decoration, they're explanations for the systems working within. I'm not sure how I feel about the glowstone behind the windows. I think it's an interesting touch. It's a little shimmery, maybe Christmassy vibes, but it's my first time doing it. I thought it was cool. But you can see that when we follow all the steps of building, that this factory is not only finished, but it feels functional. And not just because of it has more parts, but all the parts have a function. This building is part of a larger project, and this is actually the main viewpoint at which the build will be seen. And I think it fits in really well, and we've done a good job. I think that once some trees are added to frame the build even more, that it's just going to elevate it even more and it'll fit in perfectly. This factory works not because of the details, but because of the order they were added. Shape came first, then color, then texture, then purpose-driven detail. That process not only works for steampunk, but it works for any build. Once you stop guessing and start making clear decisions, building gets calmer, and the result gets more consistent. If you want feedback on your builds, or you want to practice this way of thinking with other builders, I keep a small Discord linked below, and I would love to see you guys there.